You are watching Travel World Online.
On the opening day of Indian Tourism Mart 2021, while moderating the session State of Play and Competitiveness for Indian Tourism at the Leadership Conclave, Nakul Anand, Chairman Faith, opened the session with the phrase,
Lennon rightly said, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen, and this was one such week. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Faith, I thank you for making time to be a part of the lead session of ITM 2021. I have with me 4 stalwarts, each one a role model in their own space. India has a great potential. We are all aware that India is 1% of the world tourism share. And if I was to look at what the potential is, right, nothing matters like numbers. I'd like to point out that India in the World Competitive Index ranks 34, right, which is a good number, but on its cultural resources and business travel, it ranks 8th. That means that India has not monetized its assets. There are very many countries that would love to be in the first 10 there. So we are in the first 10 there, but we are down in 34 in the overall competitive index. What are the numbers that bring us down in international perceptions? Just to name a few, an enabling tourism environment, we are 98th. Service infrastructure, we are 109th. Environment sustainability, we are 128th, right? I think this is more, and I hope that Piyush will sort of address this question. I think this is more a matter of perception, but perception is reality and needs to be reversed. How can India leverage food to enhance its share of tourism?
It's a difficult question to answer, Nakul, because experience has shown us, at least over the last year, that when Indians order at home, they're willing to be adventurous. A Punjabi family in Delhi will order from Mahabali or a Kerala restaurant and will say it's interesting. But in my experience, when the Indian middle class goes out, it still wants Chinese, it still wants tandoori, it still wants traditional Indian food. What we've got to see in the post-pandemic period is whether we bridge this gap between the adventurous things that people were doing at home. They were baking sourdough, they were ordering from home chefs who did all kinds of ethnic food, and the kind of experience they were getting at restaurants. We don't know how that will happen. What is significant, though, is that the cloud kitchens, who've been the biggest gainers in this period, who sort of supplanted the restaurant sector when it comes to delivery, and they've done a great job.
Top of your mind, any country that has used food and beverage or cuisine to promote tourism? Any country?
Is the obvious example. There are hundreds of millions of people all over the world who believe that they understand Thai food because they had tom yum soup and pad Thai when they were in Thailand. Which is why Thai food, though it was originally only a Thai thing, it wasn't really as global as, say, Chinese food, has suddenly caught on and everybody feels there's some familiarity.
Rajiv, I'll move to you. Rajiv, if there were 3 pieces of advice or recommendations you could offer to the Ministry of Tourism based on global knowledge of how countries have come back, etc., what would they be?
Thanks, Nakul. So the first I would say is incentivize domestic travel. You have talked about it earlier. We are seeing this across the globe, and governments, by a varying degree, are working really hard to incentivize domestic travel. India needs to become part of this global campaign as people get vaccinated around the world, and India has done a phenomenal job in terms of being one of the first to get a head start here, that we are able to create digital passports. We are then able to open the borders to allow for travel with people who are vaccinated, with other measurements in play, be it social distancing or wearing a mask and other things, so that travel can continue safely. And finally, what we are seeing in a number of markets across Asia, and I would encourage India to support this, is hotel workers are almost seen as the second or third line, frontline workers after the real medics per se. So a number of markets like Singapore, here, most of our hotel frontline associates have already been vaccinated. Australia is deploying the same plan. In Bali, there are conversations with the Indonesian government to initiate that. So I would say if the government can somehow prioritize the hotel workers, particularly the frontline workers, to get vaccinated early enough, will definitely help in building that confidence to travel.
Madhavan, coming to you, that we know that there was exploration of digital like never before, etc. And as a result of the pandemic, would this in any way endanger the travel fraternity? How do you see their role evolving in such a recalibrated space?
The reality is that most travel companies have not invested in technology, primarily because the travel industry in India is more or less populated by a large number of small mom and pop shops, if I can sort of mention that. In reality, the larger companies have focused on technology. And for example, I'll give you the example of the Thomas Cook Group in India, which is Thomas Cook and SOTC. We had plans to digitize as early as 3 years ago. Thomas Cook started selling packages online nearly 6 years ago, but the downtime due to the pandemic helped us upgrade the way we sold our products. Today, any of our products can be sold online, from foreign exchange all the way through a domestic holiday. Average Indian has been bitten by the bug of travel, and that's very evident from the reaction we've seen to domestic holidays. Not to leave out the fact that we constantly get calls as to when we expect the borders to reopen so that people can go overseas. Just to mention, we track our bookings, and for every 10 domestic bookings, we still get 2 overseas bookings, long haul rather than short haul. Short haul continues to grow. But the reality, that's a flip from where we were a little more than a year ago, when domestic represented about 3 to 4 bookings out of every 10. Lastly, I think what is an important point is that Indian travelers still like everything to be done for them. And we're seeing this in the domestic circuit, that people are asking us for choice of hotels, how can they ensure their transfers are done and everything else. So while I see structural changes towards the digital, I think some of the asks of the customer remain pretty much the same.
But if you were to be given, Piyush, a clean canvas in today's post-COVID or in tomorrow's post-COVID context, how, in your opinion, a few quick thoughts would you project Brand India?
I've always believed that in desperation lies inspiration. Most of the time, things which are so close to our nose, we don't see them. And I think we haven't seen them for a long time. And today, that desperation is pushing us to talk about domestic, and rightly so. And I've worked with almost every state of this country. I still remember the time when we launched Incredible India. It was, even at that point of time, it was meant for the foreign traveler, whereas you had millions of people in this country who needed to travel. And I have been saying it for the last 15 years, Nakul, that inspired me.
Turkey murgi dal barabar.
Bilkul. I also experienced, and since a lot of wonderful things I've heard from experts, I experienced myself when I spent the last, the 9 months of the COVID time in Goa. And whenever I had a very important meeting, I went down to the Taj village, and they gave me a conference room because the connectivity in my little village was not great. So I couldn't take a chance. I'd been there when there were 2 people in Taj village. And I went there 2 weeks later when their occupancy was 97.5. So there is a will and there is a desperation. All this while you collected money to go to Bangkok. Now when you're locked up in house, you say, okay. And I remember driving to the village, and my driver, I said, there's a lot of people around. He said, sir, look closely. Look at the number plates. They're Karnataka, they're Mumbai, they're Gujarat, they're families. So there is so much, and I'm not covering what has already been said about culture and religion and wellness and spirituality, which is the parallel stage of promoting it to the world. Right now, there is a great need to do things, and number of younger people will probably not be mesmerized by forts and historical things. Give them some kind of adventurous spirit, and that's what one has been trying to do. That we have a huge source. We just have to build very little infrastructure. I think the development of roads has been fantastic. If we could have some places where people could find a decent place to stay, there are millions of other places that people would love to go to. So my observation, which I can share with practitioners and experts like yourselves, is it needs your push to the government and your activity on your own that can drive this. And if we can drive this, I think we can make magic.
No, thank you, Piyush. And there is such a vast potential of domestic travel, and I think as many people that I have spoken to who obviously could not travel abroad, and as you rightly said, would have traveled to Bangkok or Singapore, etc., said, we went XYZ and never realized you could get food till 11 o'clock at night. Elsewhere we had to wait till 6:30. In Indian by nature can eat, and we never realized what beauty there was in India because we never even thought of it. But absolutely right. I think one that India can do a lot is domestic tourism. Very recently, one of your articles began by saying it's time for hotels and airlines to revise their anti-COVID protocols. That we have learned much more about the virus. I sense a ring of optimism when you say these signs of things getting better. In your opinion, is the crunch time over? Are we ready to break bread over brunch?
Two things, Nakul. One is that most of these COVID protocols were instituted when we didn't know that much about the virus. If you remember in the early days of the pandemic, the recommendation from the American CDC and from the WHO was not to worry too much about masks, that the problem with surfaces, we need to keep washing our hands, we need to keep sanitizing things. And the fears people expressed about hotels were, will somebody want to sleep in a hotel room when a guy who has COVID might have slept there before, etc. But science is now advanced. We know that the CDC and the WHO was wrong, that COVID is not really a surface spread disease. It's a disease that spread through the air. So what you need to focus on now is less surfaces and more people. Focusing less on surfaces is actually very good for the hotel industry because it allows you to resume some semblance of service. You don't have to sanitize everything, wrap it in paper. You don't have to use paper napkins. You can use proper serviettes. So there's a sense in which normalcy will return. This whole hygiene theater that we have created, where, for instance, we insist that we take people's temperature when they enter a hotel, which is essentially irrelevant because often people who have COVID don't have fever. And in any case, in India, we know now from the Sero survey, over 50% of people who've had COVID have been asymptomatic. So what we need to focus on instead is masking, on testing hotel employees, encouraging testing throughout, speeding up vaccination. I'm hoping to God that the government will see light and will allow hotels, who as Rajman correctly said, are really frontline workers, hotel staff and restaurant staff, and allow them to get the vaccine quickly. Once all of that happens, I think some semblance of normalcy will return. There was a hunger to get back to normal, to go to restaurants, to do things. What we've got to do is to find a way of managing that hunger, that suppressed demand, allowing people to resume lives as much as normal without being irresponsible, while keeping masking protocols for staff, while increasing testing, while pushing the government to give hotel people and restaurant people more access to vaccines. If we do that, and I'm pretty optimistic we will, over the next 2 months or so, no one is saying the situation will return to normal. But if we also, as will be the theme of this conference, push the domestic market, I think we can reach some semblance of normalcy. So yes, I am optimistic.
Raj, coming back to you, Raj, and I think that, as everybody has rightly said, that we've always believed in this industry that it's all about moments of truth. Moments of truth are now becoming moments of trust, right? And there is a conversion into that. However, the new world is built on the foundation of health and safety. It's moved from being reactive to proactive. How can hotels incorporate this and reduce guest anxiety, taking on from where we've said, etc.? How can we as hoteliers sort of take this forward?
Nakul, again, we see levels of trust to some extent vary by market and also by generations. For example, millennials are, the research shows 50% of millennials want to get out in almost all countries as soon as restrictions are relaxed. And we see this now, particularly in the last 4 or 5 months. I'm seeing that in any country where government relaxes restrictions, business demand comes back really strong, really quick. And it's all led by leisure predominantly, but in a number of markets now, we're starting to see corporate as well as some amount of group activity. When you talk about as an industry, I think the industry has done some good work, but a lot more needs to be done. And it really needs to be a combination of getting our associates vaccinated, tested. The piece that, we talked about making sure masks are mandatory for hotel associates, and that we follow an element of social distancing, which to me will then allow us to bring back to some kind of normality as things continue to improve one by one. We are also seeing definite shift towards brands because it's evident that travelers tend to be less risk averse, and they know the brands will be probably better prepared. So we just need to continue to build on that trust and confidence that the traveling public is putting on us.
I'm now moving forward that sometime international travel will begin to open up, right? We all know that Bill Gates has said at some time that travel is going to be 30% lower. Business travel is going to be reduced by 30% because personal conferences are not going to be the gold standard, and so forth, etc. If I was to just focus on a few segments, right, adventure tourism, where it's expected to be a 1.5 trillion business, and India has a negligible share, despite 9th being in the competitive index. MICE, which is going to be an $800 billion business, we have less than 1% share. I'm just naming a few, and you would really be the thought. What segments from an international travel would you like to focus on initially, and in what phases? What do you think would be the low-hanging fruit on international travel to India as and when international travel begins to open up?
Just to give you an example, when the Maldives opened up, we saw and continue to see a rush into the Maldives at different price points. If you spoke to anyone 2 years ago, Raj will tell you that it was viewed as a premium destination, and which offered beach. And as we all know, a lot of people in India don't necessarily value beach as a destination to go to. Suddenly the Maldives comes in, and every single Indian who has the urge to travel suddenly wants to go to the Maldives. What we witnessed in the Maldives and Dubai to a large extent over the last month and a half, and these are short periods that we've witnessed this, has been significant. And looking at the response we've got, most of them are millennials. And I go back to the point that Raj made. These are the people who have actually made a shift from fearing what COVID brought them to more to caution. So I think international travel will come back in bits and pieces. I don't think you're going to go back to, let's say, summer of 2019, where people were traveling into Europe and the US or Southeast Asia in large numbers. I think we will see a lot of short-haul travel emerge over the next couple of months. If you talk to any of the people in the industry in India, they're waiting for Southeast Asia to open up. And if that does open up, you're going to see the explosion of people traveling again. But having said that, I still believe that domestic tourism will continue to dominate this industry over the next couple of years. The growth rates, which have always been high because of smaller base effect, will continue. But international travel is not going to stop, Nakul. So leisure traveler is our first priority. Corporates have been slow to take off, and that's primarily because flights have not resumed. But what is very interesting, and I'll share some data with you, over the last 2 months, the fees that we have earned in our visa business, and we have a business where we organize visas, has crossed 2 crores every month. Now, this we saw this in December. We've seen it again in January. It essentially means that, and these are primarily corporates getting ready to travel. And these are the IT companies that want to send people back offshore into destinations where they want to work. The other interesting point that we saw, and which actually happened in the month of January, early January, SOTC received an inquiry to take 750 people from Chennai into Dubai. And it was in the second week of January. We took all 750 people. So I think there is a very slow and steady move. It's not anywhere close to where I would like it to be. But the reality is that India will bounce back internationally, both in the corporate as well as leisure, as soon as things get back to normal.
Madan, what was the one thing that the Maldives government did that they had a recovery so fast, in your opinion?
They said initially said no testing. I think later people discovered that it was better to do the testing from here and go in, because the immigration authorities weren't very clear on how to implement it. But the Maldives shed a lot of restrictions, Nakul, and I think that's what happened. And the Maldives, can you imagine at one stage there were more Indian tourists in the Maldives than there were anybody else? Even today, I suspect that Indian tourists are a major destination because it's easy to get there, despite airfares having doubled to the Maldives from when it started. The reality is people want to go. You talked about adventure tourism. We see a lot of millennials wanting to go diving. So we're seeing a lot of interest in the Maldives. We're seeing a lot of interest in the Andamans from this segment.
My point to you, Piyush, and as I said, that all that has been spoken to now finally lands up at your desk, and now I'm talking of international travel. If I may share your favorite David Ogilvy quote, that the psychiatrists say that everybody should have a hobby. The hobby I recommend is advertising. We know that every adversity brings with it opportunities. Black Death ended federalism and serfdom. World War II made US the most powerful nation. 9/11 reshaped transportation and security policies worldwide. 26/11 reshaped hotel and made hotels more secure. 203 SARS attitude towards shopping in China, the surge in online. 2009 global meltdown led to the birth of the sharing economy. With empty coffers, as Indian tourism is right now, and global travel, what could be the biggest catalyst for India to bring back global tourism? And what should be that peg that India should use?
I think, again, there is no rocket science to it, to my mind. It is your culture, it is your heritage, it is the space, it's your evolution. It's a complete package which is recognized, but not yet being pushed to that extent. If there is a lot of curiosity about India, which has been there, and whoever comes there goes back more or less as an ambassador. But I don't think Incredible India also saw the light of day with the impactful presence. We all know about it, and those who have been exposed to it have loved it. I'm a believer that when it comes to governments, tourism requires a different mindset. Nakul Anand works in ITC, and a number of other distinguished people on this panel have followed and done something for over 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I think if you're head of jails for 3 years and then head of tourism for 3 years, it really doesn't work. Maybe the government of India needs to look at it, that certain industries require certain mindsets, and those mindsets will bring along that public-private partnership, which will galvanize us into data growth. That's my belief. And saying that unless two people believe, I think Amitabh Kant was there that time, Ashish Kumar Singh was there in Kerala. These were the administrative guys who thought like private entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
And they met the right people and they did the right things together.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm saying if there can be administrative guys like that, then maybe we should identify and tell them 10 years, my friend, you're going to do tourism.
So thanks for you.
Nakul, if I can just add a point here, reinforcing what Piyush said. I think India currently runs the risk of missing out on the re-emergence of global tourism in the medium term. And I think that's a serious issue. We are either getting priced out or there is no visibility of how India is re-emerging from this whole pandemic environment. I think that's one important point. Secondly, the taxation policies that are applied across this industry, be it TCS, be it the other taxes that they're looking at.
GST and so on.
I just think that the government needs to address this. This cannot be driven by, pardon my using the word, some bureaucrat believing that we can't trust Indians who travel abroad. We need to capture some of their money upfront, if I'm putting it very crudely. On the other hand, you assume that any tourist who comes to India has got the benefit of 72 rupees to $1, and therefore they've got enough money to pay their taxes. I'm not against basic taxation, but the reality is when you start applying these selective taxation policies, I think that is going to impact us. And this post-COVID environment is going to test India's ability to overcome that. Trust me, I see that as a constraint.
Opportunity for incredible India to sort of recreate itself. We've had many views from all four of the speakers. We've heard about domestic tourism and how that can be one part and that can sustain India for a long time, be it in food and beverage, be it in rooms, etc. Then we've spoken about international tourism and how India can gradually move up in the international tourism, be it taxation, be it destinations, be it how we market it and what do we say, etc. So before I end, I'd like each of the speakers, if I could have a few closing comments from you. The topic again was, what can India do for tourism? How can tourism, and one of the viewpoints, and I believe that we as an industry could have done much better. And I think that what we need to really tell the government is that if tourism is 10.5% of the GDP, you need tourism to bring recovery back. Isn't it? It's 10% of GDP. GDP has to recover. So how can I bring across that message also to say that in the sort of route to recovery, tourism can play a great role. And look at the employment it creates. We've just said, look at the percentage of women in the workforce. We've said that it employs people across all strata of society, from unskilled to skilled. It takes money to the most remote hinterlands of India and so on and so forth, etc. Anyway, let's pause, let's move forward, and a few words from each one of you on what India should do moving forward, both domestic and international, as your closing comments. I'll start with you, Veer.
Well, I don't know that much about what we can do for the international sector, but I do believe that for the year and the year after that, probably, the future for tourism in India has to be domestic. Madhavan gave a very good example of the Maldives, which is a country I've been going to for 25 years. You asked, why did the Maldives suddenly take off? Well, it took off primarily for three reasons. One is Thailand and other destinations were shut. Two, there were cheap flights from Go Air and Indigo, direct flights from places like Bombay, which they hadn't been before, and Delhi. And three, they lowered prices at their hotels. Whether they will still continue to do that once the rest of the world opens up and the traditional markets come back, I don't know. But the lesson for us in the success of the Maldives is we could have done this. There could have been Maldives, if you look at it now, is the new Goa. It's people who go to Goa who go to the Maldives. Why is there only one Goa? Why haven't we created more destinations? And what Piyush said is right. There's just so much beauty in India. The states are willing. What we need is some kind of collaboration between state governments, the central government, and the private sector to create destinations in India. There's so much beauty that's just lying untapped. We don't need to send people to the Maldives. We should keep them in India.
The worst airports in the world were in India. Today, the best 4 airports are in India. Our highways have changed substantially. I don't think we lack in the quality of hotels and the sort of service that our hotels can offer. I don't think on the cuisine, etc. So what infrastructure are we talking about? It's a matter of perception, in my opinion, which I think that
a little bit of effort also, Nakul, is that, it was just said that participation in state governments and you are sitting at such a right juncture. Only yesterday in Cochin, the Prime Minister spoke about tourism at such length. And what the industry has to offer and what the government is seeking are in sync with each other. You're looking for employment, you're looking for women employment, looking for prosperity. It is all around you.
it's like fist in a glove. It's a redistributor of income.
I mean,
thanks. Rajiv, over to you on a few closing comments.
So, Nakul, a couple of comments. Having heard everybody, and I believe India is just perfect market for this. What we are seeing, a trend coming out of COVID with travelers, that today they are focused on ethics more than just aesthetics, which is about purposeful travel. So, as people travel now, particularly on leisure, they want to give back. They want to be part of a program where, business doing sustainability or marine conservation, say, for example, in Maldives, is all good. But if they can be included in that process, that goes a long way. Now, you at ITC have done an incredible job over the years building that reputation of responsible luxury. But I think it's about inclusiveness. It's really about including the travelers to feel that they are part of this giving back and finding a purpose for travel. We need to collectively stay very focused in offering digital training, digital platforms for growth, because this thing will go away. That's for sure. I do believe working with governments, we need to stay very focused on offering additional support. If it's not monetary, it's training, which a number of governments around Asia are doing through digital ways to just help continue the talent grow in our business.
I couldn't agree with you more, Rajiv, that talent is an important part of this entire, and yes, that the fear of losing them in this day, we need to sort of reskill them at the earliest possible. Absolutely. Well taken.
You are watching Travel World Online.